Thanks a lot. Just going to grab my clicker. Yes, hi there. So my name is Paul Archer. What I'm going to talk to you about today is about how stories travel. And I'm going to do that by telling my story and a little bit of the background about how that came about, and then actually how that story carried on and how it traveled, and how that's kind of led on to all sorts of really, really interesting things, and actually what I'm doing now with my business and with some of the businesses that I work with, and how we work to really make sure that stories are told by the right people in the right way. So I'm going to kick things off a little bit, and every story needs its characters, and these are the lead characters. This is me, my best mates, Lee Purnell and John O'Ellison, whilst we were at university, and we did what most students do. We procrastinated. We tried to come up with more and more innovative ways of not doing any work, watching neighbors, and how we could manipulate cardboard to be even more creative and interesting for fancy dress. And it was on one of these sort of trips, one of these days we were sat in a pub and we were bored and we were thinking, oh, we'd quite like to go for an adventure. We'd quite like to do something funny, ridiculous, silly. What is it we want to do? And we'd just taken an incredibly long, expensive taxi ride, and we thought, I wonder what the world record for the longest ever taxi journey is. And we thought, oh, well, actually, that's not too far. We can try and break it. So what we did is we gathered together the rest of our student loans, and the final and probably most important character of the story is this. This is Hannah. She's a 1992 Fairway London taxi that we bought from the well-known taxi emporium of eBay for £1,300. And she has virtually no redeeming features of note. She's rusting. The engine doesn't work very well. Incredibly uncomfortable. It's probably the worst vehicle you could ever imagine spending long periods of time. And we thought, we'd like to drive Hannah to Australia to break the world record for the longest ever taxi journey. And so that's what we did. So we set off in February 2011, and in Covent Garden, looking very fresh face there, actually, in Hannah. After customizing her a little bit, we basically drove a really, really long route because, like I said, we planned in the pub, and we thought it'd be funny to go the longest route possible, like all London black cab drivers do, so we could rack up the fare. So we had the taxi fare on the whole way. This is us on the ferry. We started driving to the most amazing places we could, just so we could get a really good picture of a London taxi in weird places, like the Northern Lights here. Occasionally we use some other ones, like when we crashed this snowmobile, but generally it would be we'd drive all day long. We would then meet with some amazing people. We couch surfed. So people started hearing about the story and offering up their beds, and we would just go and stay with them and just, have quite a lot of fun, which sometimes meant the next day there had to be quite a lot of sleeping in the back of the cab. And then other times, as we kind of cut through Europe, we'd start stopping and we'd camp and we'd just see where the kind of adventure took us. We didn't have any real agenda as such. We had a few visas that we had to meet at certain times, but the rest of the time we just went off and did it. If someone said, hey, come here, come and have dinner with my family, we'd do it. Or we see someone on the side of the road who looked like they needed a lift, we'd give them a lift. And it meant that we got to have just these amazing times meeting these amazing people. Like these guys, actually. So these guys are Georgian nobility. They are heir to the throne of some sort, apparently, which is quite interesting, and their dog Napoleon, who's 18 years old. I find it a bit of a weird story because they told us this from a shipping container where they were drinking homemade cha-cha brandy. So I think the regal lifestyle in Georgia is not quite what it is here in the UK. But as we kind of plod along, we just ended up seeing some amazing sights. And actually, I think probably the best way of doing this is to show you a video that we made along the way, just so you can see some of the roads and actually probably some of the bumpiness as well. So I apologize if you feel a little bit sick doing it, but this is actually how it was inside the cab. very much. And we actually managed to do all of this, and we were, like I said, we were 23 years old, and we thought it would be really funny, we'll give it a go. And we were trying to tow a London cab out of a landslide in Laos in flip-flops and board shorts. And it was slightly unprepared, but actually, because of that, we ended up just having these great sort of stories as we went through it. And actually, we were running out of money here when we were in Cambodia. And we wanted to get to Australia. That was the whole point of it. And we just got this random email from this random Israeli company. They were like, hi, we're a tech company called Get Taxi. I think Get T, you might see them around. We have just raised lots of money, and we'd like to give you some of that money so you can keep on driving around the world. So we had to dig deep in our souls and ask, did we want to go back and get real grown-up jobs, or did we want to carry on having a holiday and carry on driving around the world? So eventually we decided we would keep on going. That we very technically just scribbled out Sydney and wrote London in Tipex in the back of the car, and we headed off. So once we actually made it down into Australia, we got there to where we thought was going to be our final destination, put the car on a shipping container, and made our way to the States, where you see things got very corporate. We managed to wrap it out. We met a buddy in Pakistan who wanted to join us, and the only way he was going to join us if he bought his own American taxi with us. So that's what he did. We were then, obviously, we were on a corporate sponsored, so we were very serious. We weren't going to be dicking around at all, or doing the usual kind of things you'd expect sort of three British guys in a London cab driving across America would do. But it really, kind of the story carried really nicely. And we started to pick up a head of steam when it came to kind of press. We weren't pushing things out there. We were writing blogs. We were keeping sort of social there. But actually, it really started to kick off, I think, when we did an interview with the Wall Street Journal. And this guy thought it was a really funny story. He thought it was a corporate thing that was coming onto it. And when he met us, he realized that actually, no, it was just these three idiots in a cab. And actually, he loved it. The story just kept on cracking. They kept on fact-checking it. We were like, why are you going so into this? I mean, it's just a story. I mean, it's just, this is the and finally bit we've done on every other sort of thing. And they were like, yeah, well, I don't know. He's kind of serious. The next morning, he just calls me up. It's like, you got to go to a corner shop. And get yourself a copy. I was like, where are we? We like page 17. He's like, let's go get it. We got there, and on the front page there was two articles. One about money and stuff, and then there was this other one of how to rack up $100,000 cab fare, leave the pub, turn right, and there was a picture of our cab there right in the front of it, and it just changed everything. It was just amazing, kind of sort of everything. Then started getting really crazy. It started building up. When we eventually made it back to London, we were invited to drive in the closing ceremony of the Olympics. So if anyone remembers the Spice Girls when they were top on some black cabs, that was me driving one of the Scary Spice in front of there. So and all of these things, this amazing sort of, it all kind of came together when we came back to London, and we had all these stories that we wanted to tell. Oh, in fact, here's a map of actually, if you want to see how it works, you go up the way through the Arctic Circle, Moscow, down through Europe, into Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, India, into the Himalayas, through China, Southeast Asia, Australia, then across the United States, and then back to the UK again. And it took us 15 months to do, eventually, and it wasn't without its faults, as you could expect. So, Hannah, this is us trying to repair the heating in Denmark in -10. It was quite chilly. And actually, the clicker's not working. This is where we broke down the border with Iraq and Turkey, broke down somewhere else in Turkey. We got stuck in the sand, and then we broke down. This is actually trying to put the wheel back on in an Iraqi workshop. And this is what's broken down in India. Oh, this is when that thing fell off. This is when the wheel fell off. This is when the wheel fell off again. This is when the engine fell off. We break down in the middle of the mountains. We would break down in the rain. We would break down on the side of the road. We would break down on another side of a road. It was just all the time. And we really didn't have that much mechanical sort of skills of note other than sort of stare at it long enough. And if that bit's attached to that bit and that bit's on fire, you should probably put it out. So we would just try and bang things, budget together. Occasionally someone would help us. And by the end of it, we've got pretty good skills at fixing London taxis in the desert. But it's not exactly the best thing you're going to reuse very many times. But along the way, it was also the people that we met and the amazing places that we got to experience. And I think some of the most interesting things were happening in the most dangerous part of the journey. So when we were crossing through Iraq and Iran, just amazing people. The girls would just run over to you. The boys would be boys and try and throw tricks on their bikes. But the most amazing architecture. So Persepolis is one of the best kept sort of ancient ruins you're ever going to see in the middle of the Iranian desert. But the whole rest of the place is stunning, just truly beautiful. And it was here when we were driving along, as we normally would do, we're in the desert. It's pretty deserted. It's kind of in the name. We'd normally do this. We'd just pull off the road and we'd just go and camp, and that's exactly what we did. It was pitch black. We didn't know where we were, just that we were in the middle of the desert. And the next morning, I woke up to something nobody ever wants to hear, and that was the voice, dulcet tones of my mate Lee, opening his tent and going, he's from Birmingham, he goes, "Is that an artillery gun over there?" And he was deadly right. We had somehow inadvertently camped in the middle of an artillery field that the Iranians had built to keep the Israelis from bombing their nuclear reactor. And we were 3 guys in an old London taxi with British plates, somehow there, just waking up going, ooh, don't really want to be here, do we? And it looks like, oh, you could kind of mistake that, but actually, if you look a bit closely, it's actually a pretty big gun, and there's quite a few of them around. And so we, rapidly, we threw all our stuff together, we got threw the tents in, we just about made it out until this 4x4 bumped up the track, and these 2 guys came out, and we were like, right, this isn't great. And it got much worse when a much shinier 4x4 came out, and these 2 guys in very shiny shirts came out, and we realized that they were the secret police. We got detained, we got into all sorts of interesting things from it. Eventually, we kind of made it out. I made it out a bit more than the others when I actually got deported as a suspected Israeli spy, but the other guys managed to stay with the car, and they were the ones who actually took it across the most dangerous part of the journey, which is the Baluchistan desert. And this is where, just the bottom, where Pakistan and Afghanistan on the border there, so all the Taliban are being kicked out of Afghanistan, and all the Pakistanis were trying to smuggle everything through the other things. Lawless, you have to have these guards with you the whole time. It's completely crazy. But we had a cunning plan, because we knew we were going to sort of show up pretty badly, but we were going to blend in. So we grew some beards, really quite good ones. We were very proud of them. And this guy at the back there, that's Craig. He's this mental Australian that we met in Iran and told him what we were doing. He asked if he could do it. He's like, oh, guys, if I tell my mates I crossed the desert in a London taxi, they're going to flip. So he came with us, and actually turned out he was mental. And he stole a Pakistani guard's helmet, and almost a civil war broke out. It was mental. But we thought we were going to blend in really, really well until we actually got there and realized actually no one has beards apart from actually the Taliban. They all have really nicely trimmed moustaches. So we didn't really blend in too well. But we made it. We survived, and we made it back to London. We broke 2 Guinness World Records. We drove over 43,000 miles. We had some amazing times we were doing. We raised £20,000 for the British Red Cross, and we left the taxi fare on. We made racked up £80,000 with no waiting time on it. Oh, there you go. And so actually, what we're talking about here is actually how crowds sort of push things forward, how your story's doing. Actually, our story was made possible because people were following our story, our narrative. They were telling each other. They were telling journalists. Journalists started writing about it. We weren't pushing this out very much at all. And we would have people who would just come up to us randomly and offer, you must stay in my house. So we'd have emails from people in Australia when we all left. We got 5 emails within a week that said, always if, by the way, it's always if you make it to Australia, you've got to come to mine to drink some beers and have a barbecue. So we showed them when we got there, we bloody made it. We went to every single one of their houses. We drank all their beer and we ate all their barbecues. But it was this amazing support, a kind of collaborative way, this story that it carried. The only reason we could carry on doing these things was because someone had told someone who told someone, and Get Taxi got involved with it. But if you think about it, if Get Taxi did it a different way, and organised this trip themselves, I don't think they would have had the coverage that they actually achieved with it. So if they sat down in a room and they thought, hey, why don't we drive around the world in a black cab, we'll get loads of press coverage, they wouldn't have got it because the story wasn't authentic. It didn't have that narrative that kind of cut through. I mean, generally, we got into almost every single newspaper and most of the TV channels. The press that they managed to get for it was absolutely phenomenal. But it probably wouldn't have worked the other way because the story was there, and Get Taxi were able to sort of piggyback on that. And that's actually something really interesting where you're looking at how stories carry. What makes a story authentic? Is it because you've told it, or is it because someone else has told it? And actually, every single story you want to put across, you've got to think, how will this story carry? Because when someone tells a story, it becomes their story. When I'll tell a story and then someone else will pass that story on, it becomes that person's story. So how can you empower people to tell your stories in the right way? How can you get someone to talk about what you want them to talk about in the pub? And you think about actually how that's quite successful with other brands. So you look at some of these big sort of phenomenal stories that have carried through. I think one of my favorite ones is these guys. People talk about Snapchat, phenomenal growth, bigger than almost every single app and the speed that it's done than anyone before. But it wasn't, people weren't saying, oh, there's this app where pictures disappear after 3 seconds. They were going, kids are sexting each other, it's terrible. And most people here heard about that because they were like, okay, this sounds pretty interesting. And they're like, how does it work? And they're like, oh, there's some photos and then it disappears and everything. And that's majority of people would have downloaded it because of the story that someone would tell someone either outraged or hilariously in the pub. And that's how it worked. Another great example is the guy who jumped out of space. So people talked about this hugely. It was, obviously it was one of the biggest social media stories everything was going. Everyone knows that it was Red Bull. But not once was anyone talking about the fizzy drink that came from it. They were talking about this amazing story, and then they were talking about how this brand had managed to latch themselves onto it. And this kind of storytelling is something which I do a lot of working with the awesome guys at Strange Thoughts, the innovation. I think they've got a show there with Landmark, which is wicked geolocated things, about how we can use tech to enable brands to tell their stories. And actually what I do now within my company, with Daredevil Project, we're obsessed with how we can get brands to tell authentic stories, how that kind of can kick through. And one of the key things is with user-generated content. How can you empower your audience to tell your story for you? And this is what we've been trying to figure out. We've been working with and thinking, this is the most authentic way you can tell any story. Because your audience is telling your story on your behalf. So how can that become manageable? And most brands are aware of this now. About 4 out of 5 campaigns will use UGC as some element. You'll always see a hashtag. You're trying to involve people into the conversations and how that can kind of work. But it's incredibly cumbersome and difficult to kind of get this working and get people to do that. So that's what we've developed the product Duel for, which is a tool that completely automates your user-generated content, allows you to do it in an entirely brand-safe environment. So we allow people to run photo competitions, videos, GIFs, ideas with their audience, and then it automatically ranks and sorts it using the opinions of your audience themselves, but also some smart AI that we built into it as well. And it's pretty early stages. I mean, we only did our first thing 6 months ago with Star Wars, but it's been building up quite a lot. We've been working with some cool brands, and we were winning some things. We're over in Cannes with Unilever and just got Publicis 90 and some things like that. So we're now in a position that we can actually allow brands to allow their audience to get involved in a way which is completely automated, but very, very authentic. But I don't want to leave you there. I think one of the things that, I mean, you're going to hear some really, really awesome stories from other people here, and actually the whole thing is about travel, and travel is about storytelling. People travel to tell stories of where they've been, but also when you travel, you tell more stories, you learn more stories. Everything is about that and actually how it works. But what is it that makes a story good that you want to pass that on, and what makes it interesting that you want to tell your friends, and your friends will tell their friends, and everything like that. And I think the summary of that we learned along the way was with on our very, very first night of the taxi trip, we had no idea what was befalling us. We were couch surfing with this crazy Dutch guy called Jasper, and we ended up having the most mental night that involved us somehow finding ourselves on a Dutch, disused porn set. Jasper got arrested, and we somehow managed to lose his cat, and it actually ended up being an amazing story. And we were wondering how we'd deal with all these things that were going to come with us on this big journey. And it was like, well, he turned to us and he said in this incredibly sage way, he said, well, guys, you never get any good stories when everything goes to plan. And he was completely right. My name is Paul Archer. I hope you guys have some cool questions along the way with that along it. Thank you very much, and have a great day.